All right, welcome back. I'm back from Arkansas, back here in the studio. Today our first cup, we're gonna talk about John Cutler's new article. He just posted this a few days ago. And the title of the article is The Problem with Problems. And we talk a lot about defining the problem. We've used the Einstein quote a lot of times. If I had an hour to work on a problem to solve a problem, I'd spend 95% of the time or 50 minutes thinking about the problem and then 10 minutes solving it or something like that. Well, John argues that problem-centric thinking in product management can become performative and paralyzing. Instead of chasing perfect problem statements, he says teams should get just enough clarity to take meaningful action. His challenge is to stop turning discovery into theater and start learning through motion. He makes a few really interesting points that got me thinking. So let's take a minute and meet our panel today. So he already said we should be problem managers in the first place. So welcome Steve Johnson, who's CEO of Product Growth Leaders. Welcome back, Steve. This guy manages stakeholders by feeding them hot sauce. Say hello to Stefan Woulfin, CPO at Green Sky.
Morning.
Hey, Stefan, welcome. And this guy went from nukes to Notion docs. Welcome the author of The Product Philosopher, Dutch DeVries. Welcome, Dutch.
Hey, everyone.
And he was a chef before he was a PM. Now he's just stirring the pot at Google. Say hello to our friend Jon Harmer. Welcome back, John. He's lead product manager at Google Cloud. All
Good to
right.
see you again. And good to see you again, Stefan. It's been a while.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's good to see you.
Awesome. And I am Jason Brett. If this session goes off the rails, it is by design. So let's get started. So let me just start with you, Steve. You think PMs are addicted to looking smart in Notion instead of testing ideas?
Yeah, I think that most of the product managers I encounter are still solutions managers. They are writing stories like, as a user, I want this feature so I can have this feature I want. And so I've certainly spent my career pushing them out of solution space into product space. And that's not to say throwing it over the wall. And I did have a session a while back with someone who said, product managers just write down the problem, throw it over the wall, leave development alone. And that's nonsense too. The problem definition and the solution definition wants to happen in collaboration with the product team, for sure.
So
that's it. That's all I got.
All right. No, that's right on point and right on brand. So let me ask you, Dutch. Have you ever spent weeks framing a problem only to realize that customers or stakeholders didn't even care?
Stakeholders are always going to care. It's just a matter of whether they're going to care about the right thing or about whatever problem is the one that's at hand. So it's a matter of what problem are we trying to solve for right now? What's the next thing? And then can everything else be put off a little bit until we focus on this thing? So a lot of it's just the strategy of when things are tackled, how to prioritize stuff, not necessarily like completely redefining what the problem is and the solution we're going to provide. I hope that answered your question. My ADHD went a little haywire on that one. Sorry.
So let me add a quote to Dutch's statement. One of my friends in North Carolina uses this quote that it comes to me often. He said, "Executives and salespeople have an unlimited capacity for amnesia. All the things we decided to do last month have been wiped out by idea du jour or, I thought about this in the shower."
We found also that it's not that they, after you design the problem and the solution, that they stop to care. It's that sometimes the problem coming in so fast that there's a new, bigger, more important problem that needs to be solved. And that kind of talks about in the article of, the nested problems. Sometimes they discover it before they realize it.
Yeah, and that's a big one. So that kind of lends a little bit to the question, at what point does framing the problem really become navel-gazing versus actual productive definition that you can use to drive priorities, drive requirements, drive understanding?
I've always been in favor of brief documents, like can it fit on one page kind of documents, or a problem story that is simply a scenario that we want to address. I find that when you're writing 4, 5, 10, 50 pages, you've left the island, in my opinion. It's just like, be brief and be seated.
Yeah, probably one of the biggest problems that I had with a stakeholder was when I was consulting with a federal client, and their problem statement basically was the fact that they needed to modernize this legacy system from 20 years ago. And their definition of modernizing was getting off of a client server application so it could be cloud-based. But the problems were broader than that in the fact that it was, well, we need to get off the client. We need to get off the server so that way it can be in the cloud instead of on premises. And that meant breaking up the solutions. They had gone from waterfall to agile, thinking that, oh, we're going to do 2-week sprints. And so now we're agile. And that wasn't what they actually needed to do. They needed to become microservices and break it all down, and broke up this one application into basically 27 smaller components that we could iterate and launch MVPs on a regular basis, as opposed to waiting 4 or 5 years for all the development to be done all at once. So they had an old school vision of solving this problem all at once instead of iteratively, and that's what Agile's all about.
Well,
So that was the big-
and that's a
Dutch,
great
how did they define that problem though? What was the problem statement there?
their client server application. It was on thousands of PCs across the entire Air Force, and it was on 8 different servers that were hosted in regions, and none of the databases talked to each other. And so it was the problem they thought they had was simply modernizing, getting to modern technology, and the implementation of how to get there was bringing up a lot of other problems that could be solved in a shorter period of time. So we defined multiple problems instead of the big one that they thought they had.
And that sounds like
Yeah,
a really great
And
case
more
study.
more
for
teams
5
were
whys.
actually able to tackle it instead of trying to get one team to do all of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example of exactly what Cutler's talking about here, in that nested problems. And I can see how you would get there with a 5 whys kind of exercise. It's well, why do we need to modernize our platform? Well, we've got these systems distributed across 8 different data centers, and so the data isn't really in sync. So somebody in California can't necessarily get up to the minute data from DC. It's not practical. We're not the problem is really more about having timely information. And then there might be another why that goes even deeper than that. So that's a great example of how the problem isn't necessarily what it gets framed at, and it starts becoming this cycle. But sometimes we just know we've got this thing that we need to do. Is a little bit about what Cutler's saying. He said specifically, sometimes solutions help us understand problems. Don't dogmatically avoid solutions. They help us make sense of things. So John, with that in mind, and I'm interested in your whole take on the article, but does it sound like he's saying we should almost really minimize the problem statement part of it, or skip problem statements altogether?
No, I don't think that's what he means. And since Scott couldn't be here, I will channel a little Scott Selhorst this morning.
Awesome. 2 for 1.
And that means slides.
Get ready for some slides, Liam.
Is it working yet? My computer's being very angry with me.
Hang on. I'll make you a co-host here.
We can see the product discovery screen.
Perfect. Right. So that's the sort of classic product discovery double diamond thing, right? Problem space, solution space. You do something, you have some ideas, and some of them die, and then one makes it through to the handoff. Scott makes the argument that it's actually way more messy than that. And so you start with some things, you come up with solutions that then informs back on the problems you thought you had. It's sort of like what Dutch was saying. It becomes a whole cycle inside of that, where maybe then you end up with a thing that you need to do. And I think that's kind of what Cutler's saying here as well, is like, it's not clean problem statement, handoff, solutions.
Embrace the mess, he says.
Exactly. And my camera's frozen too.
Yeah,
Awesome.
It is. But it's a great view. You got your mouth hanging open
I've
enough.
had way more awkward versions. Yeah. That's what I get for using fancy cam.
All right. So Stefan, as we pivot back to your experience, and we talked a little bit before the show started about how your team moved into product management as a discipline for the organization. How does this How did you take this article overall in terms of really focusing on the right trade-off between problem and opportunity framing versus solutioning?
Yeah, I mean, even before we even transformed to Agile, and that was sort of a bit of like when we started to introduce formal product management, our company as a whole focused on, we knew we had problems. God knows we had new problems. But how do you define it such that, we have a strong bias for action? How do you understand when you understand enough of the problem such that you can now put together at least the beginnings of a solution to start to realize the value from solving the problem? And as the article mentioned, as you start to dig into it and you start to iterate, that's when you really start to fully understand what the problem is. Because rarely do we come to, especially stuff comes to product where there's a problem that needs to be solved, that even the people who are bringing it to us truly understand what they're asking. And in my experience, you get the phrase, "Why didn't you build what I wanted versus what I said?" That really kind of that right there, I think, epitomizes, was the problem correctly framed? And more often than not, the first time and the second time and even the third time, it's not entirely correctly framed. But did you get enough of it so that you can move and stop admiring it and actually build something that is a solution, or at least enough of a solution to get the value?
I like that. Did you get it defined enough so you can stop admiring it and actually build a solution? That seems that's a good one to kind of like encapsulate it. So I want to turn now to our audience and everybody here on the Zoom call. This is the part of Product Coffee where we continue the discussion and we tee it up with our first cup panel, but would love to have you participate as well. And anybody can feel free to jump back in. Just pop your hand up using the Zoom reactions panel. Would love your thoughts on the notion of the trade-off between solutioning and problems. And our problems, are we spending too much time on problems? Can you think of a time that you spent way too long defining a problem that didn't really deserve your attention? I see, Manesh, you've got your hand up. Jump on in here, my friend.
Yeah, not specific to that question you just posed, but we have a division right now that is coming to me with a solution and asking me for advice on that solution. They haven't defined the problem. They haven't figured out exactly what they're trying to figure out. But with some folks, you have to explore the solution and then help them bring out all the other questions of the whys and the what's behind it to get to the actual problem. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like a hybrid to what Scott was saying in that graphic, where it's, yeah, you start with a solution in this particular case, and then you try and draw out the root of the problem, and then come to a agreed upon problem statement, and then actually truly solve for it. So it's just an exercise or a process that we have to go through sometimes with some of our leaders and some of the business folks that we have to deal with to understand where they're coming from.
We often talk about asking the 5 whys to get down to exactly what you're talking about. You said, I want this thing. Okay, why do you want it? Okay, why is that important? Okay, why is that going to change things, and so on and so forth. Jerry
But
said,
it's what I've learned, and it depends on the people you work with. But some of the people you work with is, if you start asking those questions, they're like, just give me what I asked for.
Yep.
And so you've got to use the solution to kind of draw it out and work through it. And it's a process sometimes.
And that's a great point. Show them, here's what I think you want. Yep. Jump over to Jerry. You had your hand up for a second. You said you had a story to share in the chat.
Oh no, that was just to Steve's comment about my problem is we need AI. But the very short version of that story, Steve, is that I was working for a company. We agreed on an outcome that they wanted a particular process to take less than 24 hours. It was currently or they thought it was currently longer than 24 hours. And when I came back to them and said, you're already under your mark, you're getting these things, you're getting through this process in like 8 hours or less, depending on what it is, their response to me was, but the solution doesn't use AI. That literally was their response to me. And I'm like, okay, so the outcome is not less than 24 hours. The outcome you want is an AI solution that's less than 24 hours.
How you didn't know that from the get-go is beyond me. But it seems so obvious. But
I was working on outcome based, but I had my hand up actually, Jason, for something else, because one of the things that I think Teresa Torres's approach of opportunity solution trees tries to get at are these nested problems? And then out of the sub problems under your main problem, what's the one that's going to deliver the most value? At least that my experience using the technique she talked about, and I didn't get down to the solution part, I just kept it at the opportunities part, kind of helped me break down a really big problem into smaller pieces. And then as an organization, we were able to choose the one that they wanted to pursue, which sub problem they wanted to pursue first. And I'm glad he kind of alludes to it at the end of that article. He doesn't go into depth into it, but he kind of alludes to opportunity trees towards the end.
Yeah, he specifically said, I think the quote was, whenever possible, map opportunities to support shared understanding, embrace the mess, use whatever tree/mapping approach you enjoy using. And I agree. Teresa's written a lot about opportunity solution trees. She's got blog posts about it, and it's in her book. And it is a really great approach for kind of digging down to the root of it. One of the great exploration approaches. Today's session is one of our grounds for discussion town hall discussions, and we're going to be talking about project management through the plot twist. And there are quite a few situations that this applies to, and we're not limiting it to just one. But we have reorganizations, we have new bosses, we have investor drama, we have layoffs. It's not if your leadership structure changes, it's when. These are the moments that test product managers. They define careers. In today's session, we're going to dig into what it takes to deliver value and stay sane when the org chart is rewriting itself in real time. We've got quite a few guests here who have been through quite a few of these situations. So we're going to tee up the discussion, but we want to invite you to be a part of this as well. If you've got thoughts, have experienced some of these kinds of changes, and have found some approaches to really maintaining credibility, building your career, and maintaining momentum through some of these transitions, we'd love to hear what you've learned. If you've got questions, we'd love to hear your questions. So I want to start off, though, and Stefan, if I could jump over to you real quickly. Green Sky's been through a few of these changes.
We've done a couple.
Yeah, you were acquired by Goldman Sachs, and then you spun back out to independent. Who are you owned by now?
It's a consortium now, but yeah, we've run the full gamut. We were startup, we did the IPO, we got bought, we got sold.
Yep.
There's been changes in management. So, we've existed in almost every flavor of environment now that I can think of. Yeah,
and at the same time, you're doing this massive transformation into Agile and trying to convince Goldman Sachs, for example, yeah, we're doing continuous integration, continuous delivery. So we're pushing code every day. How did you lead through all those kinds of shifts?
So it's kind of two things I would say were most important. One is you need to stay maniacally focused on what your goals are. So don't let the changes become distractions. And I think the article from this morning is, really kind of leads into it. But making sure that, for us, our job is to, help our merchants grow their business and delight their customers. And no matter which phase of how we've existed, we were in, that's never changed. So, we know what is important, and just staying completely focused on that and delivering the highest value project to move the ball forward and highest value product to move the ball forward is, kind of how we've just kind of managed through all of it. Cause it's been, every few years, it's been a bit different for us. The other thing to consider though, is that it's not all noise that's going on. You need to be understanding of the fact that who your customers are changing. So our merchants and our customers, they're a constant. So that's easy to focus on, but previously, it could be our founder, it could be Wall Street, it could be, whoever it is that, is the owner, that customer set is moving in and out, and each one of them has somewhat different focus, but generally speaking, a well-managed, nimble environment that delivers value to our constituents quickly is kind of a constant. But knowing what's important to each of those customer bases and making sure that you can adjust your roadmap accordingly is been kind of how we've stayed focused and continue to grow. I'll just stop there for a second. take a breath. But
Yeah, so thanks. That kind of sets it up. But you tease something, and I'd like to double click into it a little bit. There are lots of changes that are going on, and you've got some priorities that are constant. You've got some customers that are constant, but you also have some customers that are changing. So one of the big challenges that I've seen people experience in these kinds of massive tectonic shifts in leadership and ownership is the change is coming. Some changes in priorities will come, but they're not necessarily clear yet. Tell me a little bit about how you've experienced that, especially